right. There we go.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for coming. It's nice to see everybody out. And I've worked with the mayor before and Adam before, but the rest of you are all new faces. So this is a good, we're working on the numbers, but we're not really ready to present them yet. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to give you a good overview of what we're working with and what staff is working with. And it gives me a bit of feedback too, so that I can go back to staff and say, you know, this is kind of where we're headed, or what council would like to see and how we'd like to see things presented. It's nice to be back in the city after a few years, and the city's been through a lot. I was here a couple weeks after the flooding for a couple weeks. I was working in the EOC, so I saw it then, and then I've been back and forth. Occasionally I do have family that live in the area. But it's nice to come back, and Merritt still is a very attractive, has some great facilities, great trails, for a small community, and I think we have to keep that in mind. There's lots of things that we need to do and things that need to be fixed, but every small community is like that. The infrastructure deficit, everybody's struggling with it, but we have to make steps get started in that direction is just what I want to say. And for the discussions today, we're not talking about the recovery and insurance recovery stuff from the flood. We'll do that in a separate presentation because primarily most of that will be funded through grants and insurance proceeds, and there might be a little bit. We're just working, there's a new finance person working with the recovery team, and we have meetings scheduled to work at that to see if there's anything that isn't going to be covered that we'll have to incorporate in the budget, but we're not anticipating that to be a large number. So all the numbers you'll see, if they're in there, I've pulled them out, the grant funding related to that, just because it's such an anomaly, and we want to make sure that it's consistent. And just to set the stage, a 1% tax increase right now would give us about $92,000 extra. So as I've met with staff with their requests and things like that, we've put that lens on things so that they can kind of take a look back and see how badly they need something or what the priorities are. So get my mouse in the right spot here. There we go. So the first slide, and I did print out a copy of slides for you so you can make notes on it. The first slide just shows the sources of funding. And again, this doesn't have anything related to the flood response. So 39%, if you count the parcel tax, of our funding comes from taxation. The grants in lieu and utility taxes, that's taxation that we receive from places like Canada Post, the RCMP. They pay us a grant in lieu. We send them a bill and then they decide how much they want to pay us. Generally, we're pretty much in agreement. Utility taxes, things like Trans Mountain, Fortis and Shaw, they pay us 1% of their revenue in the area a year. So that is that's what that grant in lieu, and so it works out to about 1%. General grants, we have grants that are called conditional grants, which are ones that are specific for projects, but we also get unconditional grants every year. We get a small communities fund from the province. We get traffic fine revenue, which we put towards our RCMP costs. There's a few other grants that we don't actually have to apply for. They come to us automatically. Gas tax, we do some reporting on. And so that's what makes up that 40%. And sale of services, and that's user fees. So that's what you pay twice a year for your water, sewer, and garbage. Rental of the civic center, pools, the fire department when they go out on calls out of town, things like that. So that's what all is included in the sale of services. So just to give you an idea. License, permits, and fines, that would be anything bylaw related, like business licenses, building permits, and if we were doing any ticketing. So the main focus of today is we're going to be talking about taxation, because it's the largest one and it's the one that we have the most control over. There we go. Did I go too far? I went too far. That's forward. Right. Okay. Oh, so the let me just switch. I switched up my thing and then we brought it down here and I didn't. So this is, I'm just going to skip ahead here. Taxes and fees on a single family dwelling is shows the breakdown of what your tax bill shows. So 40% of it is municipal taxes, 8% is parcel, and this also includes those user fees for water, sewer, and garbage, because that's the annual costs for the household for a single family dwelling. Now, the water, sewer, and garbage fees have not changed since 2015. Just so you know, they haven't been, we've kept them, we've looked at them over the years, but there again, as we've been trying to keep costs in line, those fees have stayed the same, but we are probably at a point with increased chemical costs and things. We need a full review. Sean and I have talked about that. The city needs a full review as to how we are building. Generally, for things like water and sewer, the user fees are designed to pay the operating costs, and the parcel taxes should be going towards the capital, like repair and replace and renew the capital. School tax show up as 18%, the TNRD is about 7%, and the hospital district's about 4%. So 30% of the tax bill, when you're talking to taxpayers and they're complaining about their taxes, 30% of that is collected by the city, but it's going outside. It's not, we don't have control over that. Let's see. So this one picture here kind of alludes a bit to what Sean was talking about. And this is municipal taxes paid versus assessment changes from 2018 to 2023. Now I just took an average house, just a house in town that's about an average price, and I just looked at the actuals. BC assessment gives us theoretical average houses, but I just took a house and looked at it over the 5 years. It had the same owner all 5 years, and it's and so you can see in 2018 the increase in, or the property tax increase and the increase in assessment were pretty similar. 2019, the taxes went up a little bit less than their assessed value, and 2020 was a year that and when Sean was walking through the financial statements today, you could see where that decision was made to keep the taxes a bit on the low side and use more of our surpluses to make up the difference. 2021, it started to pick up again, but assessment's still outpacing. Now, there are some, we don't have time today to get into, but I will send you all a list of some YouTube videos if you're interested on BC Assessment puts out some really good ones on the impact. They're like 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long, on the impact of how your assessment and how like if the municipality wants to collect $100,000, how they would collect that and how it changes with changes in assessment. So they're really good little videos. So this afternoon I'll send you all a link with the videos. They even have ones in there that talks about the difference between commercial. And the other video that's really good in there is called Milltown, and it's the purpose of BC Assessment, and Adam and the mayor have probably seen it years ago about why the different classes were generated, why the different mill rates. So I will send that out to you guys and you can take a look at it. And with that, you'll have my email address. So if anything comes up, feel free to send me an email. And if it's a question, that I will send the answer back out to everybody.
Thanks. I just got a real quick question. The flooding in 2021, before the flood, I received my assessment.
Yes.
After the flood, they wanted to do reassessment, which they did.
Yes.
And I went up 15%. I don't know. But I'm just wondering, I know there are some people that are still not being assessed, or their assessments haven't been, like, they're not living in their homes. How's that going to, does that come into affect us at this point? Because a lot of zone 3 and 4, some of the assessments went way up, some went way down.
Yes.
And some were homes that people are not in. so I'm not sure how that would work, et cetera. So is that a factor that's going to come into this budget?
Yes, it is. There's, I just have to look and see if I can find my notes. In this one, in the municipal levies, like the BC assessment, right now that we just have the completed roll, the revised roll will come out at the end of this month. But on the residential market change, there was, no, I thought I had that in there. I think I might have had in my report that I sent out. There was quite a significant amount of land value that was reduced due to the flooding. And it's hard to tell on the housing exactly what they've done, but they have made some adjustments. I can't speak specifically if how accurate they are, but I would imagine some people have probably appealed their assessment if they're not able to live in their house. So we may see a change when we get the actual revised roll.
On our assessment, it was put down to $1,000 on the house last year. It came back again as $1,000 again this year for BC assessment.
Okay. So I will, as soon as I have that revised roll, then we can go over that in greater detail. So yeah, this is what we know from the completed roll right now in residential non-market change. There was 7.9 million so that's land value reduction, zoning changes, and so that's the net. So there was a lot of new stuff, and then that was reduced by the land value reductions. So I can send that out to you. I thought I had that in a clearer thing. So the reductions, I see that summed up together. On non-residential properties, utilities, we see an increase of 2.7 million due to the Trans Mountain expansion directly, because they've essentially doubled what's taxable. And I have Merritt Green Energy. What is it called now? Okay, Nikola Clean Power. Okay, NCP. Okay, change that. And yeah, and then 5.7 million net non-market additions to businesses. So there have been some reductions and some, but we could look at specifics if we need to. We do get that report. I didn't have access to this week because Norman's not here. But let's see. I ordered them, but I didn't change it in my book, so I'm confused. So this just gives you an idea. Sean alluded to it earlier, where we lost Toco, the closure of Toco, and the movement of that from industrial. So this shows you over the last 5 years, from 2018 to 2020, this graph shows you the blue is the residential properties. I don't know if I can bring it up. The mouse doesn't appear. Oh, there it is. The blue is the residential properties. So as far as share of property tax in 2018, a big percentage was coming from non-residential properties. But as those assessments went down, the residential properties were picking up the difference. And that's part of the reason when you look at the way the taxes, because we couldn't have done that jump all at once either. We had to be gradual and a bit prudent and more prudent with that. So residential assessment, market value of new builds has increased a total of 72%, and non-residential assessments has only increased 22%. But that's just, I'm sure everybody's aware of the housing prices and how the houses go. And there again, this is another graph that I have that shows the tax revenue distribution. So the solid blue is the residential portion of the taxes, and the other blue, no, I can never remember which way I go to get there.
Right.
To the right? Right. No. Anyway, the solid blue. So the top green is the business class, and that stayed relatively the same comparatively. The light industry is about the same. It's increased a little bit in 2023. You'll see a bit of an increase there with Barkman Industries coming on. The yellow is the heavy industry. So you can see in 2019 it got smaller, and that was the change of Toco. And the gray on the bottom is utilities and the utility class. So you can see where the exemption kicked in for the Nikola Clean Power, and then as it's phased back in. So for 2023, that exemption is finished. We do have, I believe, a couple other permissive tax exemptions, but they are not as major. That one was a big, had a significant impact. The other, I think, is for a residential building. And we did look at that, and we looked at that. So, and this shows you the other mill rates over the year, how they've changed. And of course, when you talk taxes, I always like to stress to council when you hear about people talking about taxes, when they talk about a tax increase, are they talking about the total taxes increased? Or are they talking about the taxes on an average house? Or are they talking about changing the mill rate? Like there's a lot of numbers floating around when it comes to taxes, and you want to be clear if we're comparing ourselves to other municipalities, what we're comparing. Because 10% increase to total taxes might not equate to that depending on assessed value, or it can be different. And the mill rates over the years from 2018 to 2022, there was a concentrated effort in 2021, a good review, Sean, correct me, for light industry and heavy industry to bring those rates down a bit, businesses down. And the other thing is, just for an example, when I was working for the city, we had somebody come in that wanted to build a business, like buy some land. They would have qualified under light industry. And they were saying, well, we need, say, 2 acres, and that your tax rate's really high. We can get 2 acres in West Kelowna and the tax rate's lower, like that mill rate's lower. But the property in West Kelowna was worth $5 million, and here it might have been worth $1 million. So their tax rate could be like half of ours, but they'd still be paying twice as much. So you have to make sure that, so when we talk about the mill rates and the changes in the mill rates, we'll always look at what the impact is as the actual tax bill, because it's easy to get caught up and say, oh, we've dropped it, but the taxes have increased over the years because the assessed values have gone up. And if you're talking to somebody from another municipality and their mill rate's really low, chances are their average home is a lot higher. So it's really important just to make sure that you're comparing apples and apples. So that's really what it actually costs to live there. So let me just check. So that's the whole tax scenario. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to ask as we go along here.
Sean.
I just wanted to add one point, because Sheila's dead right when we did this industrial tax rate calculation, and we talked a little bit about that around Barkman and other things and the reasoning for that. And you'll see that major change on the light industrial side was in 2021 when the rate dropped from 28 to 20.44. And then what I do want to flag here is this was just a very brief discussion with council in 2022 because it was just such an uncertain budgeting year. But you'll see that everything in 2022 moved in lockstep with the decrease in the residential rate, because these are all based on multiples of the residential rate. And so you'll really note that the utility tax rate came down, the heavy industry tax rate came down extremely significantly in 2022, whereas it had been largely holding steady in the 60s prior to that. There's not as much heavy industry as the city used to have, but you will see that this is one of the explainers for how residential is now taking a larger portion is the decrease on that heavy industrial side. And in general, heavy industry, lots of communities aren't as supportive as they maybe once were of heavy industry. Light industry is, people are all welcoming light industry, but heavy industry is a little bit less popular. And so the tax rates that are charged of heavy industry in most other communities were actually, I think, quite low on the heavy industry side right now. Not necessarily advocating a change because there's a whole lot of stuff that goes with that. But I just wanted to flag that for you, that while we think we're in the sweet spot for the light industrial side, on the heavy industrial side, I suspect we might be a little low comparatively on that side. Mm-hmm. So.
And just to add to that point, on the heavy industry side, it's not easy for them to move. So once they tend to get into a community, the rates have had a creep. You'll see even in Kamloops, I think the Domtar in Kamloops is going to the city to say, hey, you know, we've been going along, but now the dynamics have changed. I don't list utilities on there because the utility Class 2, for which would be Trans Mountain and where any of the utilities, Fortis, natural gas, Fortis goes through, is that we just we're mandated, we can't do anything higher than 40, and we stick to the 40. We take the full amount from the utilities, and we don't have any issues with that. So that was just so we just don't include that. That stays in there. We just adjust the multiple to make sure that it always is at that same rate. But
Clean Power classifies as utility.
Yes, it does. Yes, it's a utility. So that's when you looked at the other one, it would show. So just going through the process, staff is developing, working on a base budget that'll incorporate any contracted increases and obligations. So anything that we've already committed to, that's committed to by prior years or 5-year contracts. We have some service agreements with places like the museum, Bailey House, those. And looking at maintaining current service levels, but incorporating all the CPI increases. Everybody knows the natural gas is going up, hydro's going up. There's quite a few things are increasing quite significantly. We're also looking at new legislative requirement. Water and sewer are being hit with stricter guidelines. Like we have manganese from the well at Kengard, and they've changed the standard for that. So that's going to require some expenditures and just regular maintenance if we're using that well. And sewer. And chemical costs are up. It's like everything else with shortage of supply and contractors. So it's forcing the departments to look at, and I know Public Works, which is one of the biggest drivers, Rick, is really working hard at looking at ways of doing things differently. We're finding things that we contracted out previously, where we used to get bids from 3 or 4 people, we might get a bid from 1 and it'll be really high. So they're they're working really hard trying to figure out the best way to make this work. And one advantage we've talked about is if you can get the existing staff to do some of these jobs that we previously have contracted out, at least that money, those employees work and live in town. The contractors come in and take the money in and go, and it goes out. So it's kind of a bit of a mindset. At one point we tried to keep, but things have changed so much over the years and that'll be the presentation for council, and that'll be one of council's directions is, do you want to go where we're more self-contained or where if we can keep going out?
Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but when we start to move on the budget and we have the binders and stuff like that, in the past we've done 2 situations where we've gone line by line.
Yeah.
Another, we've kind of done a block situation. What does the budget look like for, how do you perceive that we're going to do it this year?
I think we'll do it more as a block, like more as a program.
But we can yank out.
Yeah,
and we can red flag.
take out, or you can, if
you can red flag for later, okay.
So if it's something, just using the water system, for example, if they have a program, like, to meet these new requirements, it's going to cost this much, then they'll be able to tell you, these are the things we have to do, these are the things that are optional, and then council, but rather than going through the line by line. That is something that has changed since, and more municipalities are doing that. They're not publishing, even like when they're putting money for plans, things like that, because the bidders, if we're going to do a group of master plans or something like that, chances are what will go out to the public will be that we're budgeting $200,000 to meet these requirements. council can know what it is, but we're not putting specific dollar values out in public because this situation has changed. They're all just coming in at that or higher. Right? They're not, we've lost, the municipalities are losing their competitive advantage. So it's going to be more, so we won't get quite into the nitty gritty within the individual meetings, but we will have the backup and all the information that you would be used to having in those binders available so that council can come in and look at it, but it won't be part of the public document. Does that make sense?
And just to kind of backstop what Sheila said there, we're working on this so that we're going to have different priority levels for you. So you'll understand that if something's priority one, this is something that, like, regardless of who is any of these seats, we have to do. We're either legislated to do it. You can't make a cut in this particular area. And so look at it, understand it, know what those numbers are, but you're not going to do anything with those numbers no matter what happens. Then we'll have the kind of priority 2 or the level 2 issues, which are all of the things that are based on the current service levels. And that if there's a change that's happening there, it's going to be, we're looking at service level cuts, but that's totally your prerogative to do. And then we'll have ones that are potentially kind of changes in operation or new proposals that are based on what we feel the vision has been shared from council, whether it's around or communications or whatever it is that's come out. And you will have your opportunity to say, I don't know, you'll have to balance those new initiatives against the needs on the capital side, taxation expectations, et cetera. And so I fully anticipate that you guys will spend lots of time on those Area 3 ones. You'll spend some time in Area 2, and you'll probably not spend a lot of time on those Priority 1 things just because there's nothing that can move with it. So we're working to set that up for you as much as possible so that you're going to have the signal as to where you should really be rolling up your sleeves and going to town and where you can leave your mark on it.
The other discussion that we've had with staff is, and we've got new staff that are learning their departments and you know, and it's good, and they're very keen and they've got lots of ideas and lots of things, but this is your first budget, this is their first budget, and there's a time of turmoil. We're still not sure where everything's going to come back to, like even recreation facility users, things like that after. So my message to them has been, let's kind of keep it simpler this year for 2023, but you will see more planning. In the past, we haven't done necessarily much planning out past 2023. You have maybe the next year and then it's getting spottier. You're going to see probably a fuller 5-year capital plan than you have in the past, because that's just, it's too much to do it all at once, and that will change. They'll come back to council every year to be reevaluated, but it at least gives you the starting point of what the expectations are. And they are all very keen on, as Sean pointed out earlier when we were talking about the infrastructure deficit, we've just got to start locking in that 5-year, even a 10-year plan on the capital end. So yeah, there might be some discussions about stuff that will be happening in a couple of years too. But so I just wanted to put up a couple of things that I ran when I was looking at CPI for payroll and other reporting that I'm doing. But so the CPI in Vancouver in the past 5 years has gone up 16.4%. So when you look back to where our taxes are, it's not quite that high, but it's pretty close, the taxes overall on the average house. And then there's a CPI type index, or similar to CPI, for building construction price indexes, and for non-residential building, just in the last year alone, it's 12.5%. So any contract, like construction type contracts or anything, is just, we had one that Rick got prices for today, the other day, the guy gave him a estimate of like $22,000, and when he did the hard paper, it's up to 65. So yeah, so it's interesting. It's a challenging time to try, and so it's forcing people to think out of the box. So we do have 4 funds that we collect, that we operate at the city. We have a general fund, we have a water fund, sewer, and a transit fund. And money collected for those funds stays in those funds. They have their individual surpluses. You can kind of share between, but not very often, and so they are kept separate. So the general fund is the one that we spend the majority of the time on, because that's a taxation-based fund. We do collect tax for, we have a separate line on the tax notice for the transit tax, and I think on the average house last year it was about in the $40 to $50 range for the subsidy for transit. There again, and just we're looking at, so as we look at building the budget, there are some costs that were reduced in the last 2 years because of COVID. Like last year they cut things like training and, to keep the costs down. So we're having to look back a few years and see what the level was and try to figure out what it would be post-COVID. So we can't just roll forward last year's. And then I had to throw one cartoon in, so I threw in the one with the pay as you go, as you cross. Pay as you cross. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas of the general fund, and Councillor Charney brought it up earlier, the RCMP. The RCMP portion of the budget is based on information provided by the RCMP, and we get charged per member for the RCMP. So we get charged, we budget for 17 members, because that's the number of members we have, but we only pay for the number of members that are actually working, and generally there are 1, 2, sometimes even 3 that are off on various leaves. So I think last year it averaged about 14 and a half members. 14.8, yeah. CPO, the community policing officers, come out of that RCMP section as well, and so those are just provided by the CPO, and that the operations there are relative. We do have a municipal employee there, and then we do charge one of the RCMP members there to the CPO for the community policing office. And I don't know if they used to have a dedicated officer that was the CPO, but do they have that? Because they went away from that for a while. You're back to it. And we have 5 municipal employees located at the RCMP office, as well as the one at the CPO. So that is what makes up the RCMP portion of the budget. So we don't get involved in the cost of cars or anything like that. They Area E does everything goes into a pool, and then they figure out what it is per member. So, but they do have in the past occasionally come to council to ask to get equipment or something if it's too onerous to get it through the other process, and it's something we want to.
Councillor Richard.
When we go through the budget and different projects coming up, like for 24 and whatnot, would they be looking at maybe doing training in-house to see if we could maybe send people for training to do some of these things in-house, like you had mentioned?
Yeah, yes, that's exactly what they're looking at.
Because I think when we went and did the tour in November, they were talking about some of the training certificates they had received at the treatment plant, and so I was wondering if that's something that people are doing. Yeah,
and they have changed the treatment plant and the water plant. I think the certification levels have changed, so they've been working hard on getting that trained. But things like, just for example, like line painting, other street sweeping, things like that. So they are looking at training or buying, they might need to buy some equipment to be able to do some, if not all of it, in-house.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we would ever get to painting all of our lines in-house, but we could do sidewalks and the turn, like this is a turn lane, because we don't have that equipment right now to do it. And we all know it takes forever sometimes to get the line painters in.
Yeah.
And so it would be nice if it could be done in-house. So that was, and that we'll talk about it at the end too, is just how you guys would like to see. If you want to have the department heads in, if you want to have them come just for short periods or long days.
Thank you.
Again, a big part of this is how changes in regulation change how you ought to do business. And so, not saying it's bad that we're moving away from lead-based paints, but back when you only had to call in a contractor every 3 years to do line painting, maybe it doesn't make sense to have this equipment on staff. You do it once every few years, and it's not going to be something that has a lot of value. But now, where you're using more eco-friendly paints, great, but you have to do it every single year in order to keep that paint up. Probably changes the economics of how you do this. If it's something that you have to do every year anyways, then changing your model to be able to account for that at lower cost, keep more of those dollars within the city of Merritt is just an approach that makes sense. I think that we've actually probably been slow really on the legislative change there, and we probably could have done this 4 years ago when that legislation came in. But we can only look forward, and they can say we're making those analyses and business cases now for those areas where it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, they were looking at other changes. Other changes have happened over the year. We used to get our brine and salt, and now they mix it down at the public works yard. Yep. So they have been over the years making. So it's just ongoing. Water fund, we've talked about that. The parcel taxes were adjusted in 2019, so we're coming up on 4 years, so that might be something to consider too for maybe not this budget, but for get it done in the fall so that it's the bylaws in place for next year. User fees have not been adjusted. User fees are a little trickier to do because in order to charge user fees, we should have really solid costs behind what we're charging. So it's a matter, we have to do some analysis and make sure we're collecting all the costs so we have the true costs. And I talked about the higher chemical costs. Sewer the same, parcel taxes and user fees not changed. And garbage is run through the general fund, so that it's not a separate fund, but it's run through the general solid waste, and it's the same thing. There's no parcel tax on that, but the user fees haven't been changed either. And we've talked about that. Sludge handling, compost operating costs. I know that's something on the radar, so you'll hear about that. There again, changes in regulations and how that, and that's quite a fundamental process for our sewer treatment plant. Transit. The transit budget is based on information provided by BC Transit. Council will be approached at different times for change in service levels. People might ask you. You can either instigate it and ask Transit to look at it. Transit is coming to meet at a committee of the whole on April 4th. So they'll meet with you, and I think their plan is for them to do a review of the service. So they come every couple of years, they come, they literally ride the buses, they talk to people, they do surveys. And I find the planning department at BC Transit is very helpful and very good. So, and of course we've had some changes in the routes with the flooding. So, and we do have funding agreements with the TNRD and LNIB for the transit that goes out to Lower Nicola.
Councillor Newman?
Yeah, I'm just coming back, sorry, to the water, sewer,
sure.
And I believe that's at least it. Kind of more than surprised to see that there hasn't been any increases since 2015 in this. And when it comes back to us, I'm wondering, will you account for the asset management portion on a percentage? Like, so saying that, like, obviously on your first page of your first handout, the wastewater system and the water system both have total amounts that would be included. Would you give us a breakdown per water fund on the increase going forward to match those needs? Like, I know we'll never reach them, or I suspect we wouldn't reach them, but like, obviously we need to unfortunately we're going to have to get ahead of these shortcomings, if there's a better word, in funding for these funds in order to get them back up to a healthy reserve. So in order to go forward, like planning that we know, like in 5 years, we know we're going to have to do a major overhaul. This is coming. If we're not putting money away for in the future, and we're not taking care of today, we're never going to get anywhere. And I'm a firm believer that reserve funds work in certain instances. So I'm just curious if there's a way to approach this, or you have a plan on that.
Yes, the parcel taxes would be what you would be marking probably for the earmarking for the infrastructure deficit, like working towards that, so collecting that. So that would definitely be factor into the consideration. The asset management plan is, so I would probably recommend that the parcel taxes be adjusted based on the knowledge we have and then be reviewed every couple of years because there will be new master plans and things coming up. Because our information is from 2016, so it needs to, at the very least, those plans need to be updated to see, because there have been some replacements, some improvements, and
I just wanted to add as well that though user fees haven't been changed since 2015, they were reviewed at the same time in 2019. At the time, because the user fees are driven by operational costs hadn't changed all that significantly, and we were still able to deliver the cost for the user fees charged when we ran this review in 2019. I suspect, as Sheila indicated now, with changes in prices on chemicals and other things, that I suspect that we're not going to be in that same range of analysis now, but I don't think we're going to be so wildly far out that it's going to be sickening to your stomach in that area. Parcel taxes, as Sheila and you indicated, when it comes to the capital infrastructure side, that's where it becomes pretty critically important. The challenge is that we are doing better on the sewer reserves. Like, that's our gold standard. We're crushing it. We have lots in our sewer reserve, and that's why we actually reduced that particular parcel tax when we adjusted those rates in 2019. It wasn't an increase, it was a reduction. Our water is adequately capitalized, but it's not nearly as heavy as the sewer. And then we don't have anything for roads. And so the challenge is when you're constructing a new capital project, it usually has a road component, a water component, and a sewer component, because you don't want to just retop the road and not redo the old infrastructure that's under the road. And so we've got sufficient fund in sewer. In fact, we're overcapitalized there. In water, we've got enough to do the job, and we don't have enough to do it in the roads. And so quite often what happens is we're struggling to figure out where the grant component, where we're going to get the dollars to cover the roads portion so that we can actually do the work that the water and sewer has. And so I think that it's not always an issue with having the funds, it's where you have the funds and what you can use them for. And we've had troubles coming up with funding to construct the road components of those projects, even if we have sufficient dollars in reserve to do the water and sewer components of those projects.
so that new grant funding from the...
It'll all be going to roads. I suspect. This is your choice, not our choice. But when you see the numbers, I think it'll go to roads.
What's your thought? I can't turn you on. Councillor Char? You're on. You're lit up.
I think mine was left on from earlier.
Oh, okay, sorry. Councillor Newman, you're good to go.
Just so subsequent to that, then, is there no plan or consideration in setting up a road reserve fund so that there is always something being contributed to a road reserve fund annually? We will always, forevermore in this community, have to repair our roads. So I'm just wondering if that's something that you would consider on, even if it's a small incremental amount, at least then we're contributing to something so we don't have another Vote Street in another 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's, there are, those funds have been set up. We just have not been targeting money to it. And a few years ago, when I first started here, we were annually doing 500 in water, 500 in roads, and 500 in sewer. And
more on the maintenance side.
It's been changed. Like, that was just kind of to keep it going. But yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, we can and should. The issue is that we don't have the same parcel tax solutions that you can apply for roads as what you have on water and sewer. And so what you've seen in some communities is they've actually set up a different line on their tax bills, like an infrastructure tax or an infrastructure reserve tax, because we're not the ones that are, we're not alone in having this challenge and saying, hey, we're adequately capitalized in all these areas where we can levy parcel tax, but we're undercapitalized on roads. And so some communities that say, hey, we need to address the infrastructure deficit, but I don't want this to be just relying on what flows through operations and capital gets whatever's left, they set it up so there's a specific tax that doesn't go to operations, it goes directly to capital infrastructure, and particularly it's often to fund road components of projects. And so that's very often how that is being addressed right now, and it's becoming, from what I saw at the last CAO conference, a more and more common solution to address this particular challenge.
It makes it easier for the public to see what you're putting towards it rather than having it all lumped into your general taxation rate. To have it.
So I think we're going to have to wrap this up. I got somebody in the next 5 minutes here. So
this, I think this is really the kind of the last slide, and it goes back to Councillor Newman talking about reserves. We do have a reserve policy, and it is set up so that when there is we just haven't quite got it working, but when there is an operating surplus, there is an accumulated surplus, which would be a working cash flow, which would give you a couple months or 3 months. I can't remember exactly what it is in the policy. And then the rest of it would go into a financial stabilization reserve. And we do have some funds in there when money comes in. So that would help with the ups and downs. Like if you have like the loss of TOCO or something, if you have that, it can help smooth things. And then from there, it would go into a capital reserve. And at any point during the budget process, if we identify that money needs to go into the capital reserve, say for a fire truck or a new arena, you can also budget directly to those reserves through your budget process. But this is what happens at the end of the year if there's an operating surplus with the new policy.
So thank you very much. Any questions before we call it a day? I just want to say thank you for the brief overview. Thank you for coming to help us out through this. I appreciate it. Thank you, Linda, for the food again. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sean, for being here, and all councillors. So we do have a motion on the floor. It's been moved that this report be received for information. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Do we have a next meeting scheduled?
No, we don't.
Probably do that through email so everybody can kind of coordinate what they need to do.
Okay. The other thing, and I'll maybe just send out an email for what I was going to ask to get a feel for what council.
Sure.
We have to do public input, so I have a few options in mind. So we'll see what they would like. So I'll send an email and we'll do an email survey. Does that work?
Okay. Well, just so everybody knows, again, key deadline here is May 15th, which is when you have to have the bylaw adopted by, not when you bring this for first reading. So, like, soon. This is going to be soon. And just so everybody knows, anticipate that there's going to be things in the calendar.
I think we have to probably look at a Saturday or two.
Yeah.
It's about the only way to get this done, and I have no problems with that.
Yeah, so we'll put that out there and just see. Because that generally is just come in and you have lunch and staff that's and then come back.
Because I remember some of our sessions, Sheila, we were in here at 8 o'clock in the morning and here till 5 o'clock at night. And, it was dark in here and we had screens all over the place. Yeah, those were long.
That before too.
I like it. I'll be honest with you. I enjoy that.
It's an 8-hour budget day. You like them?
Yep.